Pat with Little Critters Veterinary Hospital, and we have something a little unique for you today. I have a handful of books that we're going to go through, and there are certain books that have helped shape my career as I've learned and grown through the keeping of animals, the raising of animals, and becoming a veterinarian. And I'm going to share some of the special ones with you. So whether you're an aspiring vet student or in vet school now, or a young doctor interested in learning to practice on exotics, I think we have some books that can be useful for you in the future that you may want to grab versus an online resource. I still use online resources every day today, but there are some books that I'll never get rid of, and we'll share some of those. At the end, I'm going to share two special books that are oldies but goodies that I think would be very useful, particularly if you're studying for board exams. So we're going to start with a very old book, but it's actually just Parrots of the World, and you can see it's pretty much been through the wars with me. This is a book that is just the natural history of some birds, and I actually like to keep books on the natural history of all the species that I see, because it's important as a veterinarian to understand what their natural needs are so that we can hopefully mimic those to the best of our ability in captivity. This book I have to share with you because it's kind of funny. If you look at this binding, it says it's guaranteed for 10 years. And then if you look at the inside of this book, this was my dad, who's now gone, and that's the date he gave me the book. They have definitely surpassed their guarantee by quite a wide margin. But I'll just show you briefly in this poor old book. We have art illustrations in here of birds, and then it goes through the natural history and what they knew about the birds at the time. Obviously, this has changed greatly over the years, but resources like this are really vital in understanding how this animal would have lived in the wild and how we can care for them properly in captivity. So that's an oldie but goodie. If you see reptiles, Mater is a book that you need to have on your shelf. It's a very valuable tool. The first edition when I got it was about, I don't know, an inch thick, and now it's a much more substantial book. Very useful, a lot of clinically relevant information in this book. It's very well done and highly respected resource. And it really goes through everything that you can think about in reptiles and captive medicine and care, as well as surgery. And so I'll give you just an example in the book here. So you can see the technique for placing a feeding tube in a turtle. Just a lot of vital information. Here we have chameleon care. I would always keep this on my shelf. Even though we have great online resources, there are some things that I'll never get rid of. Another valuable resource if you see avian patients or you intend to see birds is Clinical Avian Medicine by Harrison and Lightfoot. This is the 2-volume set. This is newer than this edition, which is the first edition. And this was Avian Medicine Principles and Application by Harrison. These are very vital on my bookshelf. I love these books and I do utilize them pretty frequently still, so there's still very valid information in here. I'll give you an example on this one. If you're learning avian hematology, we have great reference resources for cytology and microscopy. Pretty extensive information about avian care in general, medicine, general practices for birds. So very useful resource to have on your shelf. And then if we go to the older version, you can see this one, and this is kind of funny, but this was the first version, and my dad gave me this book as well. Apparently it was a birthday, but what's funny is the date was 97. A lot of people would look at this book and think it has no value because it's outdated, and certainly some of the content is outdated at this point, which is why we have the newer set. But there's still a lot of valuable information in old books, and as a bookie, I never get rid of a book. If you look at this one, and we showed this in a previous video, this has wonderful inlays in the back of this book. And this is very useful if you're learning avian anatomy and physiology. And so you start with a bird. So we have the main graphic of the bird, and you can do overlays for the various systems of the bird. So here it's showing the vasculature. And we can do another overlay, and we can see musculature. Very useful. And it gives you a real good idea at a glance of what's going on inside the bird, and then you can extrapolate the physiology that you've learned to the visual that you have. So nice reference and resource still even to this day. And then a rabbit medicine textbook. There are many good rabbit medicine textbooks. Quisenberry is one that I have on my shelf. But if you see rabbits, it's very important to have rabbit textbooks on hand so you can reference information or retrieve it quickly. This one's a very good book and Just as an example, you can see basically gastrointestinal tract, very useful at a glance to see what's going on, because as we all know, rabbits are very unique species with a gut that's more like a horse than a dog. A lot of information in some of these older books that's still very valid and very useful. And we promised you a special surprise at the end for books that you almost certainly have never heard of before. If you're a vet student studying for boards or just a pet owner and fascinated with learning more, these self-assessment picture review books are actually wonderful old vintage books that I highly recommend. And if you are practicing for a board exam, it's actually pretty useful. It's not going to be highly detailed information, but it will often help you provide a picture image to all that text knowledge you've acquired, which can be very valuable. So I'll give you an example of what we have here. They start out in the front in these books, and they have photos of clinical presentations of problems or disease in animals, in this case all birds in this book. And you can see a little chick here with a greatly enlarged crop. And this is a classic example of crop stasis in a chick, often associated with candida. And it doesn't tell you that, it asks you questions, and at the back in the references it gives you the answers. So wonderful study aid, great way of learning, and again, establishing a picture with the actual clinical text. Really fun books. They have them for all different species. Here's another one on cats. They have them on dogs. This is specifically actually dermatology. There's an ophthalmology, which is very good. You can move on and you can see that they have radiographs in here and ask clinical questions about radiographs. Here's a canary, and they point out that the legs and feet are unusual. And this is kind of a classic case of canary mites that you often see looking like little tassels and obviously overgrown nails. Wonderful books. Oldies but goodies. If you can get a hold of some, I'd highly recommend it. And the last oldie but goodie that's clearly falling apart as I've bound it together. These were produced by the Exotic magazine that we went over in another video. And they're little picture books of procedures. Now, I would never suggest you go through this picture book and do the procedure. What I would suggest is if you're learning about these animals and these procedures, again, this is a great way of establishing a picture or a visual in your mind, and then learning and extrapolating from that as you gain practice with a mentor. This little avian surgery book has great ideas. This one is on egg binding or dystocia, and they give pretty detailed information. Again, some of the information is outdated, but there's much of which is still useful even in these times. And here's another one that's avian limb surgery. And what I like in this photo is they were using the straw retractor, which is a retractor used specifically for exotic animals or very small animals. And I still use this retractor today. Very useful tool. There are many wonderful ideas in these older books.